Hi, I'm Tyler Thurman. Welcome back to another video in my coaching series. And some of you might know me as Coach Ty from my online coaching articles and my online persona. And today I want to talk to you about stress, and more importantly about having less of it and enjoying your life more. Now, the first place I like to go with stress when I talk about it is why spend time reducing it or getting rid of it, eliminating it? Now that might seem like a silly question, because I think most people can see how stress is unpleasant, but you'd be surprised how many people have been brainwashed, as far as I can tell, innocently enough, but we've been taught through our culture that at least some stress is necessary and even good. And I would just love to challenge that, because I want you to think for just a second about, have you ever been more intelligent when you've been stressed out? Have you ever been more resourceful? Like you had more mental creativity and access to wisdom when you're stressed out of your mind? I've never met anybody where that's true. Now think about this. Have you ever been more kind and loving when you're stressed than any other time in your life? Do you treat your partner and your kids and the people you love in your life the best when you're feeling distressed? I'm willing to guess not. I've never experienced that personally. I've never met anybody who's been willing to really honestly take a look at that and say that's true. And most people can begin to realize that there's not really any value in distress, the stress of the mind. One of the concerns that people come to me is like, well, if I'm not stressed, won't I just kind of sit on the couch all day and do nothing? If I don't have some level of anxiousness pushing me forward. And to be honest with you, my experience is when you see somebody sitting on the couch and doing nothing, that's usually an effect of someone who's depressed as opposed to inspired. When we're inspired, most people, they want to do stuff. They want to go create value in the world and have fun and make a difference in people's lives. So I'm not convinced there's value in stress. Now, the only caveat I can think of where that there's an exception to that is physical stress, which is not the kind of stress I'm talking about. It's actually physical stress. It's actually called eustress, which means good stress. Now, that's basically exercise. So, we stress our muscles when we lift weights and do resistance training. We stress our lungs and our heart and our muscles when we do cardiovascular activity like running or biking or hiking. And we even stress our muscles when we're stretching. And really any kind of physical activity, so that what we do is we actually break them down and build them up stronger. That's the only exception that I can think of. That's the only good stress I know of. So from there, I want to talk a little bit about what stress isn't. And what I mean by that is I want to talk about the current model that most people think about when they think about the word stress. Because let's face it, the word is thrown around a lot in our culture. Oh, I'm stressed, and this is a stressful situation, and oh, my relationship is stressful, and all these kinds of different things. So I want to begin to explore that with you for a few minutes. So this is what I and some of my mentors call the outside-in myth, which means there's things outside of us, outside of our heads, outside of our minds, that cause us stress. Now again, excluding the physical stress, let's look at that. So, people talk about having, in particularly stressful work, or stressful careers or jobs. We talk about having stressful relationships, stressful kids, stressful spouse, certain situations people think of as being more stressful than others, like, for instance, moving house, or, on the extreme side, something like, being in a natural disaster, or a loved one of yours dies and passes away. We think of those things as inherently stressful. Now, I want you to just take a look at that, because what we're looking at here is the source of stress. Where does it actually come from? What's the source of it? Now, the current paradigm, just to give an analogy, is the stress germ. And I get this analogy from one of my favorite teachers and mentors, George Pransky, and he has this diagram that he presents to groups when he talks, and it's got people who are happy and peaceful and more joyful in sort of the country or out in nature. And he's got these pictures of these stress germs that are very minimal out in nature, right? They just don't really get us much there. But when it comes to being like in the city and the hustle bustle of our jobs and our lives, there's a lot of stress germs in that environment. Isn't there? Or does it? So, in other words, we're in these situations, and somehow, magically, these stress germs, they get into us, and we feel stressed, we feel upset, we feel anxious, we feel scared. And somehow, magically, those things, they just get into us. Right? Isn't that how it works? Oh, that sounds kind of crazy to you too? Because it does to me. That sounds like magical thinking. A lot of people, they listen to me talk about the model that I use about stress and thought. And they say, well, isn't that kind of magical thinking? Isn't that really fuzzy and fluffy? And I say, well, listen to your model. Listen to the prevailing model. I mean, somehow we're in these situations and we magically get this stuff infected. We get infected by this invisible germ that makes us feel stress. Or somehow something outside of us gets inside of us and we feel stressed. That sounds like magical thinking to me. That sounds kind of crazy. So, given that, let's look at what stress really is from where I'm looking, as far as I can tell. And for me, it's all about the inside out approach. And I get this model. I first learned it from my mentor, Michael Neal. And he talks about there are only stressful thoughts, not circumstances. We can only feel emotionally our thinking. We can't feel our circumstances. And Michael Neal talks about how we're living in the feeling of our thinking. I use the analogy that, there's the saying, wherever you go, there you are. Well, I altered that a little bit, and I talk about how wherever you go, you will still feel your thinking. and it's like that in our lives, isn't it? Like, we all have had the experience of getting the supposedly better, less stressful circumstances, only to find out we still feel our thinking. We still experience those same emotions, those same stressful thoughts that we did before. They slowly creep back in a lot of times. And theirs not better, it's just different. So what I'm suggesting, and this might sound crazy or like heresy to a lot of you, but there are no stressful jobs. There are no stressful relationships. There are no stressful circumstances. If you don't believe me, go read Viktor Frankl's work. He was a psychologist that was in a concentration camp back in World War II. And, he experienced peace and well-being in the midst of what most people consider horrific circumstances. So let me just say it again, there are no stressful circumstances. There are only ever stressful thoughts. So from that place, the next place most people get to is, well, what do I do about that? How do I actually get rid of that? Because if you don't take it a step further, it's just like, well, that's nice. Okay, I have stressful thoughts. But it's pretty profound. And where most people go with it is not particularly useful. And they go to the positive thinking world. And they go into trying to control your thoughts because it makes kind of sense, doesn't it? Like, if you fully understand your stress is only coming from your thoughts, then of course you would try to control them. But that's only if you don't understand how the mind works, how the system works, what the system defaults are. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that so that you don't have to try to bring out the thought police and, you're standing there like this saying, only positive thoughts allowed. And of course, some slip by and it's a lot of work and it doesn't work. It's like that, one of my favorite analogies. Actually, I first heard from Michael Neal. I'd seen the show before, and it's an episode of I Love Lucy where she's working in like a cake or pastry factory, and it's an assembly line, right? And so there's these things, and she's supposed to like squirt something on each one as it goes by, and one gets by, and she's trying to catch up, and she goes and she's trying to reach and finish that one, and by that time 3 more have gone by, right? And within a couple minutes, there's this huge, the factory shuts down, there's this huge mess of cake and pastries, and it's just sticky and gooey, and it's a disaster. And it's like that with our thinking when we try to control them, because we don't have that kind of degree of control over our thought. In fact, when we focus on trying to keep the ones that we don't want out, that makes them bigger. So, I don't know if you've heard before, but one of my favorite sayings is, where your attention goes, energy flows. And where you place your attention, things expand, they get bigger. And it's true with our thoughts. We make them more important and more significant, even when we're trying to keep them out. So, and I'm not talking about sort of trading out optimism, or trading out pessimism for optimism. So, most people, they think, well, all I have to do is, move from my negative thoughts to more pleasant, optimistic ones about the future. Well, that strategy, it just doesn't work. Because you're still, even if you trade up in stories, the stories in your head, which is just another word for thought, you're still trapped in your story. You still can't see out of it. And when those unpleasant thoughts and stressful thoughts come knocking again, you're going to be trapped in those again. You're not going to be understanding what's really going on. It's going to feel real. It's going to feel significant. So here's the key to it all, as far as I can tell. It's about understanding. Now, understanding gets a bad rap in a lot of sort of personal development and psychological fields. And in some areas, it's not all that relevant. But as far as I can tell, when we have a deeper understanding of our nature as human beings, the nature of mind and thought and consciousness, and just an understanding of how our experience is being created, it can transform your life. You can go from the most stressed out person in the world, and if you have an insight about that, you'll experience more peace and well-being than ever before. And I've seen it happen with people. I've seen it with myself. You just don't, life becomes gentle. You still have the ups and downs, but you have the awareness to know that they just don't, they're just not significant. So I'm not talking about strategies. I'm not talking about your intellect. I'm talking about like a deep heart, spiritual understanding, where you see it clearly. I'm not talking about discipline and practice. It's all thought. We feel our thinking. We emotionally feel our thinking. We can't feel anything else emotionally. That's it. We emotionally feel our thinking. We can only ever have stress from a thought. Now, that's not it. So, it's not just thought. It's our thought and our consciousness. Within thought, within our minds, we use consciousness to bring our thinking to life. We bring it to life. We pour our energy and attention and our focus into it, and we make it real. We have these thoughts that come along, and we say, yeah, that's right. That person shouldn't have said that to me. I need to do something about it. I need to put them in their place. And we just get caught up. We get caught up in the spin. Sometimes it's not even the content of our thinking, it's the speed. I walk around and sometimes I can just see people thinking themselves in to a riot in their own minds, into depression, into anxiety, into fear, into stress. Innocently. It's so innocent because they don't know it's happening from the inside out. our ability to attribute the source of our well-being and the source of our stress to anything and everything outside of us is what trips us up. To the extent you think your stress comes from outside you, of course you're going to try to change things outside you in order to change how you feel. It makes sense when that's your level of understanding. But when you understand that it's coming from the inside out, and you don't have to do anything about it. Because here's the good news. Two things. First of all, we have an infinite potential for new thought in any moment. So if our feelings come from our thoughts, and we have an infinite potential for new thought in any moment, if we open up to it, if we stop trying to oversteer our lives, that's a miracle. In any moment, someone can have a change of heart, a change of mind. Have you ever had that experience where you're so stuck in your thought patterns about one thing, and then all of a sudden, you saw it differently? It's wonderful. Because in that moment, your feelings will change. Your emotions will change. Your stress level will change when you see it differently, when you have different thought, divine thought. So I'm hoping by this point you can begin to see the innocence of what people do to try to eliminate their stress. People do all this crazy stuff, right? We have these coping mechanisms for stress. It's crazy variety, anything you can think of. There's overeating, there's drinking, alcohol, there's drugs, there's gambling, sex, exercise even is a coping mechanism for stress. All these things we physically do because we think we need to manage our stress outside ourselves. The source of stress out there, it's not out there. It's in here. It's in the mind. It's in thought. And it's in us bringing our thinking to life. Let me give you an example. One of my favorite metaphors comes from a brilliant coach and speaker, Steve Chandler. And he talks about the story of the kid that's in he's in a mental institution, and he draws a scary picture of a monster on a piece of paper. Forgets that he drew it and that it's just a picture, and then runs out of the room screaming in terror. And it's what we do, right? We come up with these thoughts and pictures and images in our head, and we forget innocently that it's just thought. We don't know. We can't remember. And that there's an infinite potential for new thought at any moment. So that's the first wonderful thing. The second one is our default. All of our mental and spiritual defaults are well-being, peace, joy, love is how I usually talk about it. You're made of love. And when the buzzsaw of your thoughts slows down, when you begin to let it slow down, stop feeding it. There's a wonderful story that I can't remember where I first heard it, but it's about an old Native American elder, and he tells the story to his grandson about how there's these two beings inside us. I think he talks about them as wolves. And one is cruel and evil and violent and just horrible. And the other one is pure love and joy and peace. And they're fighting for control inside you. And the grandson, he says, "Elder, Grandpa, which one will win?" And the elder says, "The one that you feed." And that's how it is with our thought and our consciousness. We feed those thoughts of evil and anger and upset and stress and anxiety and overwhelm. We feed them and we make them real and they come to life. We don't know that they're just shadows. They're just shadows of our own thoughts. Another one of my favorite analogies I heard not too long ago about this. It comes from The Matrix. Now, if you haven't seen The Matrix or you haven't seen it in a while, I highly recommend you rewatch it with some of these principles in mind, because boy, do they really echo a lot of what I'm talking about. And when Neo, at the end, when he becomes the one, right? And I would invite you to consider that you are the one, and that we're all the one. But when he becomes the one, he begins to see the code of the matrix everywhere. And when he sees that, when he understands the truth, when he sees it as clear as day, he begins to be able to move seamlessly and effortlessly through the world that is actually a world of illusion. And it's the same with our own thought. That's where stress comes from. Now the next bit I just want to touch on is, can action help? Because everyone comes to me and they say, "What? But I go on walks in nature and I meditate and it makes me feel better. I feel at peace." And to that I say, of course it can help. It can help you begin to take your thoughts less seriously. It's like there's certain situations that we get in where we give ourselves permission to let our minds slow down. But those actions, they're not the source of your well-being. They never were, they never have been. They never will be. The source, your well-being, you got that. But those up and down feelings, those come from your thoughts. The anxiety, the stress. We can sure think our way out of our well-being. Boy, can we. I know I can. And so these things like, walks in nature and meditation and snuggling with a pet. Dancing's one of my favorites. They're not the source of our peace and our quiet. Because, think about it, it doesn't always work, does it? If it was the source, it would always work. People go on vacation. A lot of people, I'd say most people, they take their thoughts right with them. They're in their heads, they're thinking about work and all the stuff they're going to have to do when they get back and everything they left. And they're laying on the beach, stressed out of their minds. It's never the action that's the source. It can help. In the worst situations, I'll go for a walk, knowing that usually I'll give myself permission to slow down and get in touch with my inner wisdom. Now, I want to just touch on why so many people, probably 99.99% of people, look outside of ourselves for our stress. We look to manage our stress, and we see the source of our stress outside. And I'll give you the analogy. It's an old story, an old joke about the guy who's outside, and he's looking for his keys under the street lamp outside, and the power's gone off in his house. And he's looking, he's searching, he's looking all over on the ground, and eventually some other people come over and they start helping him. They say, "What'd you lose, mister?" And he said, "Oh, I lost my keys." And so they start helping him look, and eventually one of them says, "Well, mister, where did you last see your keys?" And he said, "Well, in the house." and I said, well, why are we looking out here? He said, "Well, the light's better." And in a funny way, it's kind of like that with our stress and our thinking. It's just easier to see outside. When we look within, it's not quite as clear. It's fuzzy. We're not quite sure what we're looking at. And so it's the most innocent thing in the world that we mistake our circumstances for being stressful, because it's easier to look out there. The light's better. Now, let's just take a moment. I want you to just imagine with me right here, right now. Just do what you know how to do to let your thoughts settle. It's like a snow globe. We shake it up with our thinking, and our energy and our consciousness, and we pour it into our thoughts. And the second we just stop doing that, the snowflakes settle and the water gets clear. And you know why the water gets clear? Because the nature of water is clear. Particles in water will settle out because the nature of water is clear. And the nature of your mind is clear. So just take a moment. Doesn't matter what you do, because the doing doesn't do anything. But sometimes it helps to just slow down physically. So just go ahead and take a deep breath. Imagine what it would be like to live your life without stress. You don't have to do any of the things that you did before to cope with stress. Over-exercising, overeating, drinking too much alcohol, eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia. We look to drugs, smoking, shopping, gambling, you name it. All that stuff can just fall away. Think of your well-being, living from a place of well-being. How much more love would you have to give? How many more things would you have to share with the world? How much creativity would you have access to? A whole lot more. How much love could you share with the world? If you knew that your natural state was well-being. Imagine that, a lot of people talk about they've felt like they've had this big empty hole in the middle of them. And they've been trying to fill it with all this outside stuff. achieving the right circumstances, accumulating the right things, having the most attractive partner, the most power, the most success they can, trying to fill it, and it's always empty. It never takes. And imagine that all of a sudden you realized, you understood the truth that hole you've been trying to fill, that was a wellspring where your well-being just naturally comes bubbling up to the surface all the time. And you've been trying to stuff stuff down in it, and you clog the pipes. The wonderful thing is, the water will always squeak through the cracks eventually. It'll always bubble up to the surface, no matter how much you've been pushing it down. Now, to end this video, I just want to read you something from a wonderful man named Sydney Banks, who is a real, as far as I can tell, a purveyor of truth. He sort of coined the phrases that people talk about as the three principles, which is one of the foundations of my work, which we've been talking about here today, which is mind, consciousness, and thought. And I want you to just listen from a place of your own well-being. And I want to leave you with this. This is something he wrote. And he said, "We worry over nothing." How many times have you worried, and you look back in your life and say, I don't know why I ever worried about that? Or you're in a big tantrum and you're mad at the world, or you're mad at your spouse, and 3 days later, you can't remember why you were mad, because all it was thought. And you forgot what the thought was. The past is now. It's history. It's an illusion in time. And if you're going to work from that illusion in time, you're going to keep it going. There's no end to it. To forgive is to forget. So you have to forget the past to forgive. Once you do that, you'll find your freedom. But again, I'm going to say to you, you don't just do that to other people. When you look in the mirror, you see an innocent person. And I know sometimes you might look in the mirror and say, "Innocent my foot," because you don't like what you see. Why don't you like what you see? Because of your thoughts. We're back to that again. It's always thought. The missing link called divine thought. It's a gift that we were given to have the freedom to walk through life and see what we want to see. How much better than that can you get? That you have the freedom to walk through life and see as a free thinker. That is the greatest gift ever. To be a free thinker. I'm going to wrap up this video with that, and I just want you to go away and sit with that and notice. Just notice if you see anything for yourself, any truth for yourself in anything of what I've said or what Sid wrote. And if you're interested in continuing this conversation with me, feel free. There's more than one way to do it. There's many ways. I write weekly articles online. www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com. You can check me out. I'm in the process of making more videos. They're on the way. And you can give me a call if you want to have a one-on-one conversation. I do one-on-one coaching with people. You can call me at 503-389-3778. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with you. And if you stick with it, I promise you, you're going to see something beautiful. And you might not know what that is, but I have a suspicion that what that is your own peace and well-being. It's not what you have. It's actually who you are. Have a wonderful day.